Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Glass didn't just break. It exploded, a shimmering, lethal rain of diamonds against the midnight sky. The noise was a thunderclap that severed the heavy, suffocating silence of the penthouse office, instantly drowning out the whir of the massive rotors beating the air just outside the jagged maw of the shattered window. The wind roared in, violent and cold, whipping the heavy velvet curtains into a frenzy and scattering documents like frightened birds. In the center of the chaos, stepping off the skid of a hovering black assault helicopter and onto the carpeted floor of the 40th story, stood a figure carved from darkness and fury. He didn't check for guards. He didn't scan the room. His burning, obsidian eyes locked instantly onto the trembling figure tied to the chair in the center of the room. "I didn't knock," Julian Vane growled, his voice a low vibration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Skymark Tower. He racked the slide of his customized heavy pistol, the sound crisp and terrifyingly final. "But I figured you wouldn't mind, Silas, since you took something of mine." Elias, the man bound to the chair, looked up through a haze of dizziness. Blood trickled from a cut on his lip, staining his pale skin, but his eyes, gold-flecked and wide with disbelief, found Julian's. The scent of ozone, burnt fuel, and enraged alpha pheromones flooded the room, instantly choking out the terrified scent of the Omega. Silas Cregan, the man standing behind Elias with a knife pressed to the Omega's throat, froze. The sheer audacity of the entrance had bought Julian 3 seconds of shock. That was 2 seconds more than he needed. "You're insane," Silas hissed, his grip tightening on the knife, pressing the blade just enough to draw a bead of red from Elias's neck. "You flew a chopper into a no-fly zone, through the city grid, too. I would burn this entire city to ash to get him back," Julian interrupted, taking a step forward. The glass crunched beneath his Italian leather boots. "Now, move your hand, or lose it." To understand why a billionaire tycoon would risk federal imprisonment and death by piloting a military-grade aircraft into the side of a rival's headquarters, one had to understand the 2 weeks of hell that preceded the crash. Elias Thorne was not a damsel. He was a brilliant structural engineer, a man of sharp wit and sharper tongue, who had spent the last 3 years trying to escape the suffocating gravity of Julian Vane. They were fated mates, a biological fact that Julian accepted with possessive reverence, and Elias fought with tooth and nail. Elias wanted a career, an identity, a life that wasn't defined by the multi-trillion-dollar empire of the Vane family. He had left Julian, walked out of the penthouse, blocked the number, and taken a job consulting for Cregan Corp., specifically to prove he could stand on his own. He hadn't known that Silas Cregan was losing a trade war to Julian. He hadn't known that Cregan was desperate, or that Cregan didn't see employees. He saw leverage. The kidnapping hadn't been dramatic. It was a coffee meeting that turned into a needle in the neck. When Elias woke up, he was 40 floors up, the elevators were locked down, and the stairwells were guarded by mercenaries. Cregan had sent the ransom video an hour ago. He didn't want money. He wanted Julian to sign over the rights to the waterfront development project, the crown jewel of the Vane Empire. Julian had watched the video on his phone. He saw the bruise blooming on Elias's cheekbone. He saw the terror Elias was trying to hide behind a mask of defiance. Julian didn't call his lawyers. He didn't call the police. He called his pilot, told him to stay home, and walked to the helipad on his roof. His head of security, a gruff beta named Marcus, had tried to stop him. "Sir, the Skymark has biometric lockdowns on the elevators. The stairwells are rigged with gas canisters. A ground assault will take 20 minutes. They'll kill Mr. Thorne before we clear the lobby." "Then we don't go through the lobby," Julian had said, stripping off his suit jacket and rolling up his sleeves, revealing the intricate tattoos that marked him as a man who had not always been a boardroom CEO. "The windows are reinforced, sir, and the wind shear between the buildings. The windows are reinforced against wind, Marcus, not against the landing skids of a Bell 429 ramming them at 40 knots. It's suicide. It's the only way to be in that room in 5 minutes." Julian had climbed into the cockpit. "Get the medical team ready. I'm bringing him home." It was a tactical insanity, A move so reckless that Cregan's security team hadn't even modeled it as a threat. They were watching the streets. They were watching the elevators. They weren't watching the sky. Back in the shattering wind of the 40th floor, the standoff was reaching its breaking point. Silas Cregan was sweating. The pheromones rolling off Julian were thick enough to taste. Dark chocolate and gunpowder, a suffocating blanket of dominance that made Silas's knees weak despite himself. This was the difference between a businessman and a predator. Cregan played games with money. Julian Vane played with lives. "Drop the gun, Vane!" Silas screamed, his voice cracking. He tried to pull Elias closer, using the smaller man as a human shield. "I'll slit his throat. I swear to God." Elias groaned, his head lolling forward. The drugs were still in his system, making his limbs feel like lead. But the sight of Julian, standing amidst the ruins of the window, wind whipping his dark hair, looking like an avenging angel of death, sparked a fire in his chest. "Julian," Elias whispered, the name falling from his lips like a prayer. Julian's eyes flickered to Elias for a fraction of a second, softening with an agonizing mixture of love and terror, before snapping back to Silas, hard as diamonds. "You're shaking, Silas," Julian observed coldly. He took another step. "You're a beta trying to posture as an alpha, and you're terrified because you realize you've made a mistake you can't buy your way out of. Stay back." Silas pressed the knife harder. A thin line of blood ran down Elias's white collar. That drop of blood was the catalyst. Julian didn't shoot Silas. That was too risky. A reflex jerk could drive the knife into Elias's jugular. Instead, Julian shot the floor, specifically, the junction box of the floor lamps next to Silas. The bullet sparked a mini explosion of ceramic and wire. Silas flinched, instinctively turning his head away from the sparks. In that split second of distraction, Julian moved with preternatural speed. He crossed the distance in 2 long strides, dropping the gun and seizing Silas's wrist with a grip that crushed bone. There was a sickening snap. Silas screamed, the knife falling from his useless hand. Julian didn't stop. He spun Silas around, driving a knee into the man's gut, doubling him over, before grabbing him by the back of the neck and hurling him across the room. Silas crashed into his heavy oak desk, crumpling to the floor, wheezing and broken. Julian didn't even look at him. He fell to his knees in front of Elias, his hands hovering, trembling for the first time. "L," Julian breathed, the nickname rough in his throat. He pulled a serrated combat knife from his belt and sliced through the ropes binding Elias's wrists and ankles in seconds. "L, look at me." Elias slumped forward, falling directly into Julian's chest. Julian caught him, wrapping his arms around the Omega's waist and burying his face in the crook of Elias's neck. The familiar scent of vanilla and rain, now tainted by fear and blood, filled Julian's senses, grounding him. "You," Elias coughed, his hands gripping Julian's shirt weakly. "You came through the window. I told you," Julian murmured, pulling back to cup Elias's face, his thumbs wiping away the blood on his lip. "I told you that you could run to the ends of the earth, Elias. But the moment you are in danger, I will find you. There is no wall high enough, no door thick enough." "You're an idiot," Elias sobbed, the adrenaline finally crashing into hysteria. Tears spilled over, hot and fast. "You could have died." "I was dead the moment you left," Julian replied simply. He stood up, lifting Elias into his arms bridal style, as if he weighed nothing. Across the room, Silas groaned, trying to reach for a hidden panic button under the desk. Julian paused. He turned slowly, Elias safe in his arms, and looked at the broken man on the floor. The coldness returned to his eyes, absolute and terrifying. "If you ever speak his name again," Julian said, his voice low and devoid of humanity, "I won't come with a helicopter. I will come with a scalpel. Do you understand?" Silas didn't answer. He just curled into a ball, terrified into silence. Julian turned back to the window. The helicopter was still hovering. The pilot, Marcus, who had taken the controls at the last second, keeping the bird steady against the wind. "Hold on," Julian whispered to Elias. "We're jumping," Elias asked, eyes wide. "We're flying," Julian corrected. He stepped out onto the skid, the wind howling around them, and for the first time in 2 weeks, as the city lights sprawled dizzily below them, Julian Vane felt his heart start to beat again. The extraction was a blur of noise and wind, but the aftermath was a quiet, sterile sanctuary. They were at Julian's private estate, miles away from the city, hidden in the rolling hills. The master bedroom was dimly lit, the fire in the hearth casting long, dancing shadows against the stone walls. Elias sat on the edge of the massive bed, wearing one of Julian's silk shirts that swallowed his frame. A medical team had already come and gone, stitching the cut on his neck and treating the bruises on his wrists. They had given him a sedative, but he had refused to take it. He needed to be awake. He needed to process the insanity of the night. The bathroom door opened, and Julian walked out. He had showered, scrubbing the smell of aviation fuel and violence from his skin. He wore loose gray sweatpants and nothing else, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. Water droplets clung to the dark ink of the tattoos on his arms, tattoos that told the history of a man who had fought for everything he owned. Julian stopped at the foot of the bed. He looked exhausted. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a raw, exposed vulnerability that few people ever saw. "Does it hurt?" Julian asked, nodding toward Elias's neck. "Only when I turn my head," Elias said quietly. Julian flinched as if he had been the one cut. He walked around the bed and knelt on the floor between Elias's legs. It was a submissive posture, one that the CEO of Vane Enterprises would never take before anyone else. But here, in the sanctuary of their shared trauma, the power dynamics shifted. The rescuers sought forgiveness. The rescued held the power of absolution. Julian took Elias's hands, his thumbs tracing the bandages on the Omega's wrists. "I'm sorry," Elias frowned. "For saving me? That seems counterintuitive." "For driving you away," Julian corrected, his voice rough. He looked up, his blue eyes dark with regret. "I squeezed too tight. I know that. I was so terrified that the world would see you and try to take you that I locked you away. I made you feel like a prisoner in your own life." Elias looked down at him. He remembered the arguments, the suffocating security details, the way Julian would growl if another alpha even looked at Elias during a gala. It had been too much. It had felt like ownership, not partnership. "I left because I couldn't breathe, Julian," Elias admitted softly. "I wanted to be an architect, not Julian Vane's Omega." "I know," Julian whispered. He pressed his forehead against Elias's knees. "When I saw that video, when I saw you bound and bleeding, I realized that my control was an illusion. I couldn't protect you by locking you up. I couldn't protect you by pushing you away. I can only protect you by being by your side when you choose to stand." Elias ran his fingers through Julian's damp hair. The strands were cool and soft. "You flew a helicopter through a window." Julian let out a dry, humorless chuckle. It seemed like the logical escalation. It was madness. It was necessary. Julian lifted his head. "I will back off, Elias. I will fire the shadow detail. I will let you work for whoever you want. Except Cregan, obviously, since I'm going to dismantle his company by sunrise." Elias smiled, a small, genuine thing. "Obviously. But," Julian continued, his gaze intensifying, the alpha surfacing again, "you have to promise me one thing." "What?" "Come home." Julian's grip on his hands tightened slightly. "Don't stay in a hotel. Don't stay in that shoebox apartment. Come back here. Sleep in this bed. Let me wake up and make sure you're still breathing." I can't survive the silence again, El." The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the undeniable pull of their bond. Elias could feel Julian's soul reaching out to his, a desperate, clawing need for reassurance. It was a slow burn, a fire that had been smothered but never extinguished. Elias looked at the man kneeling before him. He saw the monster who could destroy a building without blinking, and the lover who was currently trembling with the fear of rejection. "No more tracking devices on my phone," Elias asked. "None," Julian promised. "And if I have a late meeting, you don't buy the company just to cancel it." Julian hesitated, then sighed. "I will try my best." Elias laughed, a sound that broke the last of the tension. He slid off the bed, sinking to the floor so he was eye level with Julian. He wrapped his arms around the alpha's neck, pulling him close. "Okay," Elias whispered against Julian's lips. "I'll come home." Julian didn't wait. He crushed his mouth to Elias's, a kiss that was desperate and deep, tasting of mint and salvation. It wasn't gentle, it was a reclaiming. Julian's hands roamed over Elias's back, pressing him close, shielding him from the memory of the cold wind and the shattered glass. Elias melted into the embrace, the trauma of the day fading into the heat of the man who would burn the world for him. They were broken, complicated, and perhaps a little toxic, but as Julian pulled him down onto the thick rug, shielding him with his body, Elias knew one thing for certain. He was safe. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf, not with chains, but by bleeding for him. If you enjoyed seeing Julian tear the sky apart to save what was his, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a partner who was too controlling if they risked their life to save yours? Or is freedom worth more than safety? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece, best quality, high-res. 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art, intense action scene. Man 1. Julian, tall alpha male, black hair, sharp jawline, wearing unbuttoned white shirt with rolled sleeves, holding a heavy pistol, fierce protective expression. Man 2. Elias, omega male, lighter hair, bruised cheek, wearing disheveled suit, looking at Julian with shock and awe. Background is shattered skyscraper window at night, wind blowing curtains violently. Helicopter hovering outside with spotlight beaming in, shards of glass suspended in air, dramatic blue and orange lighting, cinematic composition, depth of field.